Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the monthly FFF webinar. If you're returning, welcome back, and if you're a first-timer, welcome, and I hope that we'll see you in the future. I'll do a quick plug for next month. It's going to be on the 11th. The 11th next month. That is a Wednesday, and the topic will be "The Market is a Beautiful Thing." So maybe kind of continuing the theme from today. So I'll speak for about half hour or so. I'll try to keep it to that and leave maximum time for discussion, questions, comments. As you already know, I'm sure the title is "The Myth of Market Failure." And in the language of economics, a market failure has been defined by David Freeman. And let me go to my PowerPoint here. You can see the quotation. There's David Freeman, by the way. Figured I'd put his picture up. And the quotation from David Freeman is, a market failure is a situation where each individual correctly chooses the action that best accomplishes his objectives, yet the result is worse in terms of those same objectives than if everyone had done something else. As a rule, the pursuit of individual good in the market brings no such negative result. Individual rationality tends to produce overall good results. On rare occasions, when rational individual actions lead to regret by those same individuals, the result is labeled market failure. Now, when I say that market failure is a myth, I don't mean to deny that such regrettable situations can occur in the market. I only mean to deny that they are peculiar to the market. They can occur in all sorts of contexts, including the political context. Hence, we need a broader, more accurate term, one that doesn't prejudice people against the market. Drawing on Freeman's writing, I propose the term group rationality failure. We might win some support for the market if more people understood that this kind of failure is not unique to the marketplace, but rather is a feature, an occasional feature of human action in any realm under certain special circumstances. Moreover, as we'll see, this is less of a problem in the market than elsewhere, and that's going to be key to our discussion here. By the way, for a discussion of various kinds of market failures, and there are different kinds, although they have this common theme, I refer you to an article by Art Carden and Steve Horwitz, which is at the Liberty Fund site, called "Is Market Failure a Sufficient Condition for Government Intervention?" If you Google that, I'm sure you'll find it. The title again is Market Failure a Sufficient Condition for Government Intervention? And the authors are Art Carden and Steve Horwitz. Now, a popular example of market failure is the negative externality from pollution. If all producers undertook the expense to reduce pollution, the result would be better air for all. But each producer will find it rational to avoid the expense of reducing or eliminating harmful emissions, counting on every other producer to undergo the expense. We're assuming here that the harm from any one producer is insignificant, polluter is insignificant. Thus, the outcome, dirty air, is a negative for all concerned. I'm ignoring here the obvious property rights approach in order to illustrate the group rationality phenomenon. Another example is the classic public goods problem, which is a case of positive externalities. An example is, say, a protective shield against nuclear-armed missiles. If a good is produced in such a way that it is consumed collectively or non-rivalrously, that is, one person's consumption does not diminish another person's, and free riders can't be excluded from its consumption, then the theory says that the good will be underproduced or perhaps not produced at all, because everyone will have an incentive to free ride. As a result, everyone is worse off from their own point of view. They want the service. They free ride, assuming they'll get the service because other people will pay. Other people think the same thing, so therefore it's either underproduced or not produced. So the first thing to notice is that similar phenomena can occur outside the market context, hence my point that we should not be calling this market failure. In an article published in the December 2005 issue of Liberty magazine called "Do We Need Government?", Freeman gives an example from the realm of warfare. So I'll quote him here. It is sometime in the 12th century, somewhere in Europe, and I am one of a line of men with spears on foot facing another bunch of men on horseback with spears, moving rapidly in our direction. if I make a rapid cost-benefit calculation, I make a rapid cost-benefit calculation. If we all stand, we might break their charge. If we run, we die. I should stand. The mistake I have just made is the word we. I only control me, and I am only one spearman out of several thousand. If everybody else stands and I run, my running has little effect on whether the charge is stopped, and I won't be one of the men who dies stopping it. If everybody else runs and I stand, I die. Whether the rest of the line is going to run or not, or run or stand, I should run. Everybody else in the line makes the same calculation. We all run, and most of us die. Close quote. So this is a case of a group rationality problem outside of the marketplace. I take it no one will mistake that scene for a market. Some anti-market people might, but I don't think anyone here will. Okay, Brian Kaplan has examples from the world of government and politics, examples of this failure of group rationality. And I'll quote Brian here. Many economists who study politics decry the large negative externalities of voter ignorance. An economic illiterate who votes for protectionism hurts not just himself, but also his fellow citizens. Others believe externalities in the budget process lead to wasteful spending. A congressman who lobbies for federal funds for his district improves his chances of re-election, but hurts the financial health of the rest of the nation. So if everybody is doing that, then there's a general decline in welfare. Close quote. Or take this case. Now I'm quoting me. I tell a group of people that I'll go to Washington, D.C. to lobby for a general tax cut if they help finance my effort. Each person wants lower taxes, but realizes he will get a tax cut whether or not he donates to the cause, as long as most other people contribute, of course. So all of them abstain, or most of them, let's say, but without the money, I don't go to Washington, and no one's taxes are reduced. Then there's the famous failure from game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. In this case, two people arrested and accused of committing a crime are held in isolation and confronted by the police with the option of cooperating, that is, squealing on the accomplice, or remaining silent. Under the plea deal offered, each person's best possible scenario is to squeal while the accomplice remains silent, because in that case, the stoolie goes free. The other one goes to prison. The second best scenario is for both to remain silent. The worst case for each is to remain silent while the other talks. Now, I'll give you a PowerPoint on this one. I found a good graphic of this. Oops. There's David again. Okay. The problem is that since neither can control what the other one does, and since they can't coordinate, neither can take the chance that the other will talk. Remember, under the plea deal, if one remains silent while the other talks, the first goes to prison for the maximum term while the stool pigeon goes free. Thus, remaining silent is not a good choice, and both find it rational to talk, thereby, per the deal, receiving less than the maximum sentence, but more than the minimum. Had they both taken the risk and remained silent, they would have served less time. And here you can see the PowerPoint. We have A confessing. What happens if he confesses? If he remains silent. If B confesses. If B remains silent. If their best situation collectively is to get 1 year by both remaining silent, because if one, as you can see here, if one confesses and the other remains silent, A goes free, B gets the max 20 years. If they both confess, 5 years, and vice versa. So since neither can control what the other one does, they can't take if they remain silent, hoping to go for the best situation, the best situation, they can't count on that the other one will remain silent. And if they end up both remaining silent, well, if they both confess, they're going to get 5 years. If they both remain silent, they each get 1 year. But it's going to be in the interest of each of them calculating for himself to talk, and that way, well, if they both talk, they get 5 years. They each of them can't get the optimal, which would be 0. Anyway, I hope that's clear. All right. I don't know if you probably didn't get that, did you? So let me just do that one more time. There's the graphic. I'm sorry, I don't think I put it up there. Anyway, you see the point. Here's A confessing, A remains silent, and B confessing, B remains silent. If they both talk, they're going to get 5. If they both remain silent, they'd get a year. But they can't count that each can't count on the other one remaining silent. All right. So that's classic prisoner's dilemma, and again, a failure. If they each do what's individually rational together, they don't end up with the best situation they could have had. Okay, so my question is, if the same kind of failure can occur in the market, in government, on the battlefield, and in law enforcement context, why do we call it market failure? The name implies that this problem is unique to the market, and as we've seen, it isn't. Now, such failure in the political realm was largely overlooked until the public choice school of political economy brought it to the world's attention. Before then, to justify government action, it was deemed sufficient to show that the market led to a suboptimal outcome. That's what I'll call the opposite of the public choice model, the public interest model, where people thought government always acted and was able to act in the public interest. They assumed if you could show that the market outcome was bad, then that's all you needed to show to propose a government solution. Public choice thinkers showed that this is an illegitimate argument because one cannot merely assume that the outcome of government action would be better than the market outcome. It might well be worse, and of course we have reason to believe that it will be. So to repeat a favorite story of Pete Betke's that illustrates this, the public interest model of government as opposed to the public choice model is like the Roman emperor who holds a singing contest. After hearing only one of 2 contestants, the emperor has him killed and declares the second the winner without hearing him, on the grounds that he couldn't possibly be worse than the first. So that's the way political science and policy thinking proceeded until public choice came along. So no matter how much one likes a particular market outcome, why assume that the government outcome must be better? The assumption at least requires justification. It certainly is conceivable that a government outcome could be worse. It's more than imaginable. Of course, we have documented cases. So if group rationality failure is ubiquitous, if it can occur in any realm, does that mean it can't serve as an argument in favor of the market and against the state? After all, it applies to both, so can we use it? It doesn't imply that. As David Freeman says, while such failure can be used as an argument against laissez-faire, some people will certainly use it, it's an even stronger argument for laissez-faire. How can that be? The key lies in the issue of externalities. That is, in the question of who reaps most of the benefits and bears most of the burdens of action or policy, the particular actor or the public. Freeman writes, quote, in private markets, most of the time, an individual who makes a decision bears most, although not all, of the resulting costs and receives most of the resulting benefits. In political markets, that is rarely true. So we should expect that the market failure that results from A taking an action, most of whose costs or benefits are borne by B, C, and D, should be the exception in the private market, the rule in the political market. He calls it a political market. I don't like to use the word market for the political realm. It follows, David continues, it follows that shifting control over human activities from the private market to the political market is likely to increase the problems associated with market failure, not decrease them. David wants to call them market failure. This is what I'm challenging here. So, close quote. Look at what Freeman is saying. In the marketplace, when you buy a product, you typically bear the entire cost and reap, if not all, of the benefit, then the lion's share of it. If I go to Kroger and take a box of Cheerios off the shelf, I pay for the Cheerios at the checkout line. I take the Cheerios home and eat them. Yes, I can share them, but that's not important for our analysis. So action, cost, and benefit are neatly aligned. Externalities are minimal to non-existent. Since I bear the costs and reap the benefits, I have an incentive to choose carefully, even doing research if called for. If I make a mistake, I choose better next time. Compare this now to the political, quote, market. Let's say voting. I go to the polls well, actually I don't, but the hypothetical me goes to the polls, and I vote for a candidate. I vote for candidate A. Do I get candidate A? Not unless 50% of the rest of the voters vote for candidate A. My choice won't be decisive. Typically, no single vote matters in any election at all, except for perhaps the smallest of towns. Nothing in the world would have changed had any individual voter stayed home in bed on any election day. That's true for the most part. This has important implications. If an individual's action has only the remotest relationship to the outcome, she will tend not to invest much time in making sure she takes the right action. Since she has many other areas in life where her action would be decisive, such as picking breakfast foods, why would she devote much time or expense to picking a candidate? Unless she's a wonk or an activist and regards devoting time that way as a consumption good, she's not going to do it. Her time is scarce, better to attend to matters in which her actions can make a difference, and pick candidates on some superficial basis, perhaps the mood created in commercials, or how the person looks, or some other superficial thing. After all, to really research a candidate would require understanding economics. Now, how many just average people are going to undertake a study of economics in order to be able to judge political candidates better? After all, a lot of what candidates say are in the nature of economic policy. How do you judge economic policy except for some sort of feel-good standard unless you understand economics? Once again, to become an informed voter, you really need to know some basic economics, but how many people are going to take the time to do that? Not many. Another aspect of this is that any individual voter personally will bear only a small portion of the expense and reap only a small portion of the benefits, assuming there are any, of the outcome of an election. Expenses and benefits will be scattered over many millions of people, so any one person will only be experiencing a very tiny portion of it. This again affects her willingness to invest time and money towards making the right decision. Now, to see the point clearly, ask yourself how much effort you'd be willing to devote to picking, say, a president if your choice would be decisive. In other words, if you knew the person you're going to vote for is going to be the winner, and if you would bear all the costs and reap all the benefits. I imagine you would be willing to devote a great deal of effort to picking the candidate under those circumstances. As I've already noted, group rationality failures can occur in the market also. I don't want to deny this. The difference, the difference, however, is that unlike the political realm, the marketplace contains incentives to overcome such failures. The most powerful incentive is the lure of entrepreneurial profit. As Freeman writes, a market failure is also a profit opportunity. If the result of individuals acting rationally in their own interest is to make them worse off than if they acted in some other way, it follows that an entrepreneur who could somehow move them to the better outcome would produce a net benefit, some of which, with luck, he could pocket in the form of profit. Hence, in a market society, there is an incentive for private parties to find ways around the inefficiencies due to market failure, close quote. Broadcast radio and television should have been impossible because no broadcaster could charge receivers of his signal, and so each of them would have a incentive to free ride. Since everyone would see that incentive, and a lot of people would seize the opportunity to receive a free good, producers would have correspondingly less incentive to provide it. Hence, there wouldn't be the broadcast signals. The free riders would be worse off from their own point of view precisely because of their self-interested action. That's a classic textbook. Well, it's not a classic textbook example. It should have been, except it didn't work out that way, did it? We did have broadcast radio and TV. Why did we? Because some sharp entrepreneur, lured by the prospect of entrepreneurial profit, came up with the idea of selling commercial time to soap makers. Problem solved. Would a government bureaucrat have thought of that? And I say parenthetically here that Elinor Ostrom, the late Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, has devoted a good deal of her work to exploring other private ways of solving group rationality failures involving common pool resources like meadows and fisheries and things of that nature. Very interesting work if you're interested. So nothing analogous to entrepreneurial profit exists in the political realm. On the contrary, the incentives all work the other way. A government failure is an excuse for bigger budgets, more staff, and more power. According to the conventional wisdom, market failure requires more government, but government failure requires more government too. That seems like a rigged game. Now, this is not to say that group rationality failures can't be overcome in the political realm. They can be and have been, despite the difficulty. Income tax rate cuts, for example, would benefit everyone, even those who did nothing to achieve them, say by contributing money to taxpayer organizations. In theory, then income tax cuts should be virtually impossible to achieve. But in fact, we know income taxes have been cut in the past. In fact, far bigger things that should have been fatally plagued by free rider problems have happened, such as revolutions. They should have been impossible, according to the theory, because everyone should have been hanging back, waiting for everyone else to overthrow the oppressor. It's a great way to gain freedom without taking any risks. Except if everyone thought that way, no revolution would have occurred. But revolutions have occurred. People can and do act on grounds other than personal material reward. I mean, homo economicus, the economic man, is really a very misleading model because it leads people to think that people only act on the basis of, narrow material gain and nothing else. And if you just take that assumption, then you can't explain why people do a lot of things that they do. Gordon Tullock, for example, had trouble understanding why there was revolution because, again, he said, why wouldn't everybody just wait for everyone else to pull it off and minimize the risk to themselves? So in the political realm, some free rider problems can be overcome, not as readily as in the market because of the lure of profit. We know this. It's in the history books. Another example is the end of the slave trade, which required a change in public sentiment or ideology, even when many people's personal material gain would have been small. In fact, ideology can be a big factor in overcoming group rationality problems in both the economic and political realm. And let me put up a quote from Jeffrey Rogers Hummel. Oops, I got to do that. There's a picture of Jeff. And the quote is, ideology therefore becomes the wild card that accounts for public-spirited mass movements that overcome the free rider problem. For ideology can motivate people to do more to affect social change than the material rewards to each individual, than the material rewards each individual would justify. So just again making my point that people are motivated by more than simply money or by some short-term material reward. They may stage a revolution because they want their children to be free, even if they anticipate great risk to themselves. So not only are group rationality failures far less likely in the market than in government, in the market such problems contain the seeds of their own solution, thanks to entrepreneurship and the profit motive, so they are less likely to persist. Whatever we want to call such failures, I propose that we stop talking about market failure and talk about this more general phenomenon so the market doesn't get stigmatized. So at that point, I think I spoke a little less than the allotted time, but I'll unmute everybody, and I hope that was enough to kick off some conversation. So just feel free to speak up. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. If you got background noise going on, see what you can do to lower it or suppress it. But I think you're all unmuted now. So who wants to be the first to contribute to the conversation?
I got something.
Go ahead, Zach.
Can everybody hear me?
I hear you, Zach. Is Zach speaking? Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Go ahead.
Alrighty. Last night or the 2 nights ago, Senator Rand Paul was interviewed by John Oliver on The Daily Show, and one of the first questions that Mr. Oliver had for Senator Paul was, well, look at the amount of people in this country that do not have health care. Should we not call that market failure? And then he went on to do his alternative approach, but I really like what I learned today. I think it's much more appropriate to call it, like Professor Richmond was saying, group rationality failure instead of just market failure, because group rationality failure helps us to trace the origins of government intervention in the healthcare market to create what the anti-market people like to call market failure. So I think we can definitely use this tool and this calling group failure to really defend the free market and dispel this idea of failures being in the market itself.
Well, here's what I think about that. I'd be a little careful, because don't forget, a group rationality failure occurs when each individual is acting from his point of view rationally to obtain his goal. I'm getting background noise, a little scratchiness. I don't know what that might be. But anyway, so each individual is doing what looks like the right thing to do to attain his goal, and as a result, the sort of the aggregate effect is negative from the point of view of each of the actors. Now, before I would look for a group rationality failure in the area of medical care, I would first want to point out that we don't have a free market. It can't be a market failure, not because there aren't market failures per se, but because we don't have a free market in medical care. I would start with that.
Good point.
We have, every state has an insurance cartel, right, which a regulatory cartel, which is a form of privilege. You can't even buy across state lines. Of course, the medical profession is all riddled with licensing and certificate of need and all this sort of stuff. It's not a free market. The medical society.
Beyond all that,
the
state pays over half the expenditures.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
So,
through Medicare and Medicaid.
So economically, the state's in control.
The government's a huge
Call
buyer.
that out.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I would invoke my thesis tonight on that, because I don't know. I don't see how that's a result of people acting rationally. Well, they may be acting rationally under the political realm as it's set up, but then that's not attributable to the market at all, because the government has so skewed to things that it's barely, you barely should even call it a market. So I wouldn't go to that first. I'd first want to talk about all those other things. You know, if I thought about it more, maybe I could find areas where this phenomenon was involved, but it doesn't seem to be the main thing going on there.
But your point is very important, because we've got statists that try to attribute this lack of insurance as market failure, when Professor Richmond just clearly demonstrated it's not market failure at all, and I think that's important.
Just one correction: I'm not a professor, so I can't let you give me that honorific without feeling funny about it. So just call me Sheldon. No professor. Right, my full-time job is FFF and editing the publication and writing. So no professor and no doctor.
I got a question.
Go ahead, jump in.
With regard to the term market failure,
yeah,
it baffles me how somebody, basically anarchist, would come up with that term. Did he describe any rationale for why he named it that?
Well, you're talking about David Freeman.
Yeah.
No, that is not his term.
That was his term.
That's a pre-existing term. There's a huge literature going back, I don't know how far, but certainly earlier in the 20th century.
Got it.
Maybe earlier, I don't know. Referring to market failure, you had people who were critical of laissez-faire, looking for reasons why government needed to play a role, and so they started identifying these failures, and they would say, look, you got a free rider problem. You can't exclude the people who don't pay. Therefore, famous example is the lighthouse. Okay, Ronald Coase wrote a famous paper on this. Even John Stuart Mill and others would say a lighthouse can't be provided in a marketplace. Why not? Well, because you can't control who sees the light. You can't shine the light only for people that pay the fee. People who don't pay also see it and be able to guide their boats, their ships, and therefore people have an incentive not to pay, and if people don't pay, no one's going to build lighthouses. For a long time, people thought that was the case. Ronald Coase finally did some empirical research. I'm hearing like scratchiness or paper. I don't know where that's coming from.
Seems to be coming from Tom.
Okay, I didn't mean to single anybody out, but try to not move papers around, because I couldn't. It's hard to think.
Somebody's playing a bass guitar too.
Yeah, I realize some people are in homes and they can't totally soundproof. That's fine. At least the bass. I'm a bass player, so maybe I'm partial, but it seems kind of low at least. Anyway, Ronald Coase did some empirical work on the case of lighthouses in England, and it turned out for hundreds of years the lighthouses were privately owned. They were privately owned. The entrepreneurs, the owners of them, made deals with the ports And when you came into a port, it was clear what lighthouses you went past, given your time of day you were traveling, and you paid the tolls at the ports. And the state, when the state took over the lighthouses in England, it wasn't because they weren't being built, because they were. And in fact, the state didn't even change the form of collection after taking over the lighthouses, which meant collection was not the issue. They had some other mode.
Yep. They
Anyway,
treat roads a lot like that too. You know, well, they wouldn't happen because nobody would build a road for himself and all that stuff. And of course, people do.
Well,
But,
of course, the road doesn't have the same problem because it's easy to exclude a non-payer, right? If you go
well,
to
that's where I was going with this.
Yeah.
Technology provides that you can charge people who come on the road independently. And I was thinking one thing the market might actually come up with to solve that problem of deadbeats not paying for lighthouses is use a radio signal that's encrypted that you have to pay for to be able to hear. And so
that's a good point. But
what I'm getting at is that the market would eventually work around that deadbeat problem.
Right. That would
set
in motion an entrepreneurial process to try to solve the problem.
Right.
Which is, of course, Freeman's point. The reason the market holds the seeds of the solution to these things, unlike the political realm. Anyway, who wants to jump in next?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Cole. Yes.
I was just going to can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
I'm clear.
Just to add to the point you were making earlier about the cereal box, going to the store and you pick out the cereal box and go home, you get the benefit from it, you had the cost. Just to add to that in the political realm, even if you had that deciding vote, you go to the polling booth, you place your vote, you still don't know what product you're going to get. You could be voting for him because you say, I get 60% of things I like what he says, 40% I don't like, and it turns out he actually does the 40% you don't like, not the 60% that you actually did like. So
absolutely.
Even a worse situation than it originally looked like.
If we shop the way we pick candidates, here's what would happen. You'd walk into your grocery store, and you'd see two baskets, two carts with a variety of differently, a different array in each cart. There might be some overlap, but then they're different products. And the carts are sealed, so you have to go in and vote for one of them. And then you go home and watch the returns and see which one you get. Everybody gets the same one. And so you'd look at the goods. You'd say, yeah, like you said, I like 60% of the ones in that one. I guess I give the edge to cart A rather than cart B. Imagine if we shopped that way.
Well, not even just that. If he does do this 60% that you like, he has to then wheel and deal with other people. So that 60% you like might not even look anything like that when it's done.
That's right. That's right. I should have added when you get your cart home, it turns out there's all different stuff in it. That would be, if democracy is so good, we should propose that for grocery shopping.
Right.
Exactly. It's so successful in the political realm. We should spread it. And we should do religion that way too. But yes, go ahead. Who's speaking?
This is Kevin.
Go ahead.
I wholeheartedly agree that market-based solutions are superior to government dictates, but the market is a social phenomenon. So can we really say at any scale that there are correct solutions? Going back to the quote that you started us out with.
That there are correct solutions. Well, by correct solutions, I meant from the individual standpoint. I wasn't thinking of some overall correct solution.
And in a very small scale, like the prisoner's dilemma, that makes perfect sense. But at any large scale, given the disparity of knowledge and information amongst the participants, isn't the fact that this is a social institution and not a thing like a machine, doesn't that kind of make the question mute? I mean, it's almost moot. It's almost as if we have a language problem by saying market failure. The market isn't the thing. It's a social institution in which many, many individuals are involved with varying degrees of information and knowledge, as we were pointing out before about knowledge of economics. And I'm wondering if we're kind of chasing our own tails here. And again, I wholeheartedly agree that market-based solutions are preferable to any kind of coercion, particularly government coercion. But I'm wondering if we're falling into a trap by doing this. I mean, we had another example of the trap before. We were talking, the intent of what we were talking about was health insurance. We called it health care. And the two are just, discretely different things. Sure.
It's not even health insurance. It's sort of bank account insurance. It doesn't insure your health. It insures you, it might ensure that you don't get wiped out financially. Sure.
So if the market isn't a thing, if it's a, this emergent social phenomenon, can it possibly fail at all?
Well, I thought that, the upshot of my remarks, I thought was that it's not the kind of thing that can fail. People can fail in particular projects, right, or the pursuit of particular goals, and they can fail, and there can be this sort of failure, like I say, where everybody does what they think is best to get their outcome, and as a result, nobody gets with the outcome they're aimed at. But I wouldn't blame the market. I agree with the thrust of what you're saying. The market is a process, and it's a process of people pursuing their goals largely through exchange. So I agree with what you're saying. Go ahead. Just speak up, Ryan. You don't need to raise your hand.
Yeah, just because Kevin pretty much asked my question, but I just wanted to elaborate on that. It always seems like when someone declares failure, there's a divorce from the fact that failure needs to have a goal first, and that from an outside observer, there's no way to know what the individual market participants had as their goal. And as we learn, from Mises and others, that preferences and values are not cardinal, they're ordinal. So when you see, for example, a person who's overweight eating at McDonald's, you can sit there and say, oh, look, they're failing at their goal to lose weight, but perhaps they just value, the short-term benefit of tasty food to losing weight, so that's not a failure. That's just them doing what they want to do. And it always feels like people who decry market failure are simply trying to hide their own judgment of others behind some sort of objective principle, when really it's just them saying, other people are not behaving the way I want them to.
Yep.
I think that's a good comment.
It's collectivist at the root, isn't it?
They're
The idea that
bias.
we know better than those individuals do.
I think that I agree, Brian, and the other comments. Let me distinguish two things. In the hypothetical cases that we give in illustrating this, we're stipulating what the goals of the individuals are, so we can, for illustration purposes, that's perfectly legitimate, right? I can say A, B, and C want objective X, but they don't get it, so it's because of this failure, of this problem. So from their point of view, they've failed. But I agree, when you're observing the real world, what people do when they criticize the market is, I agree, they're secretly saying, that's not the outcome I want, and so I want to use force through the government to bring about the outcome I want. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
It almost feels like that's the sole purpose of most mainstream economists, is to basically say, other people aren't playing by my program.
Yeah, they're being secret moralists, parading, disguised as economists. I think that's a very fair point, right? They're making value judgments, and but they don't admit they're making value judgments. That's what I tried to. I wrote an article a few weeks ago. I think one of the TGIF called "Airbrushing Barbarity," and I tried to show how the language of public policy is presented as sort of this value-free language. And I'm not the first to say this. Many people have said it. And so it comes off sounding like, oh, I'm a social scientist. You see them on TV all the time, right? I'm a social scientist. And I say there shouldn't be soda servings more than 20 ounces or 16 ounces. And they present that as science. I'm a scientist. It's bad for you. Well, okay, that's irrelevant to public policy. You can say it's bad for you. Maybe you could even prove it. But what justifies the next step? Asking the government to outlaw it. There's a big gap there that they never try to bridge because they can't bridge it. But they act like there's no bridge to gap, right? There's no gap to bridge. They just need to say it's bad, and therefore it follows government ought to ban it. And that's what we have to constantly expose. They may be qualified to say, too much soda is bad for you. They're not qualified to say government therefore should somehow restrict it or ban it or do what Bloomberg wants to do in New York and not let you have cups bigger than 20 ounces or 16, whatever. Anyway, who's next? Someone else.
I would just argue one point further, which is that bad is itself a value judgment. So you could say soda is detrimental to your health, but you're presuming that people value health over something else.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not everybody values longevity on the same level.
I'm an Aristotelian, and this is a whole other subject. I think there is objective good. I'm a subjectivist. I'm a value subjectivist in economics, but I'm not a value subjectivist in ethics. But that's a different subject. We don't need to argue about that. I think you can demonstrate that there are things proper to rational beings, But that has nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with economics or politics, which is about when
And
is
at
it.
least in other domains than soda, it can be demonstrated that what's bad for some person is objectively good for another person.
Yep.
And that's another variable that comes into it.
Yeah.
Just because it's bad for 98% of people doesn't mean the 2% that whose life it might save.
Yeah.
And we're talking like FDA here now, right?
Yep.
Or not FDA. Yeah, FDA and DEA, both of them. You're denying them the opportunity to do what's right for them.
True. For example, in the area of smoking, you see this quite a bit. When so-called public policy types and public health types talk about smoking, their assumption, they don't often say this, they don't feel they need to say it, their assumption is that there's zero benefit to the smoker. They act like it's all, bad and no good, and therefore they cannot, therefore they attribute the smoking purely to an addiction that the person wants to get rid of. But that's not true. A lot of smokers smoke because they see benefits in it, and
I have friends that started later in life that have actually said, "I like to smoke." I started at 23 years old, and they just continue to do it because they like it.
I know of smokers who said it helps their concentration and they wouldn't get the work done that they get done. It helps their digestion. Those are benefits.
And when it's not tobacco, I've heard that same argument too.
Right. Even if it causes cancer, that's a downside, but that doesn't mean there's no upsides. And yet the public health types want to act like there's zero upside at all, and that it's got to only be irrationality or addiction, which makes people smoke. And
Smoking helps me not punch people in the face and not frustrated. Now that's a public health benefit.
Okay, I was going to take this one step further afield on this calorie business. I don't even believe all calories are created equal. There's a good book called Bad Calories, Good Calories by Gary Taubes that goes through the science on this. But the conventional wisdom is that all calories are equal, and they're all equally bad. And the reason we get fat is because we take in too many and we don't burn off enough. And that apparently is not true. But anyway, that's a different subject.
Yeah, Gary Taubes, I can't remember the exact metaphor, but he's done some really good metaphors just showing how only focusing on calories is just a side point.
Yeah.
Like, it really doesn't even get into the meat of the issue, so to speak. So
There's a great documentary. It's been on Netflix. I don't know if it's up there at the moment, but it's called Fathead. Which was done by Tom Naughton, who's also a part-time comedian. He's a funny guy, but he did this, although entertaining, serious documentary that was really an answer to Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me, which was a total bogus stunt just to get McDonald's. And so Taubes plays a big role in that documentary. So we're way off topic.
I thought it was great too.
But it's great. Look it up if you haven't seen it. It's a lot of fun, and you'll learn a lot. Anyway, we're off topic here. This is not a nutrition webinar. Anyway, who wants to say something about, quote, market failure? Anybody else? Well, my gosh, we're going to run out of steam before we run out of time? That's the change. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Augustine, does it say? Go ahead.
That's a question. This is Agustin.
Yes.
That is Agustin.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, I would like to raise the question, due to my experience of 10 years as commissioner of the FTC from Mexico,
sure.
that every single time that the market failure argument was raised in our meetings, we always found that the market failure was referred to parameters set by regulation.
Sure.
And this is in the world of facts where we start getting into the problem, trying to from the perspective of the government. It is always important to dig enough in order to find where the intervention of the government is responsible of the so-called failure. I believe this is the most important concept, aside from the academic discussion. Market failure, praxeology, or whatever involved in this failure concept. I think the most important, due to the consequences when an agency, a government agency, believes that there's some sort of market failure in a certain market, because this is of a general, universal market, we need to start from there. There are millions and millions of markets, not the same markets. When we found a so-called failure on a specific market, there is always the culprit behind, and it's generally regulation and the intervention of the government. I think we should on that perspective.
I agree. No, good, very good point. I formulated a law. Someone later on, I think Tom Woods or somebody named, or Lawrence Vance, subbed it Richmond's Law, so I'm flattered. But I said in an article somewhere that no matter how regulated an industry or a market is, no matter how saturated it is by government, if there's any kind of problem or failure, it's going to be blamed on whatever little sliver of freedom remains. I mean, that's just the way it works. So it's what you're saying. People won't look to how, no matter how dominant government is in it. If there's some problem, they're going to say, "See, markets don't work." And like I said in my original talk, right? Market failure requires more government. Government failure requires more government. When it comes like, you got to feel the game is rigged when that's what it comes down to. But I agree totally. Anyone else?
Okay.
Nobody else? I guess if this was, for this crowd, too non-controversial.
Just for clarification, instead of using the word market failure, were you suggesting we use the word group rationality failure? Or
well, yeah, I kind of take group rationality failure. I mean, I kind of take that from David Freeman. I'm not really happy with it. It's not a very lyrical phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of what's involved, right? Under certain special circumstances, people acting rationally those individuals end up worse off than they were, than they expected, because of the kind of examples I gave. I don't.
You could argue that their rationale is imperfect because it did not include all the variables, as it couldn't have included all the variables, as the calculation was incorrect. I did not do better.
Right. The things like that. There's information problems, and of course, as an Austrian, I would say it's bogus to assume the market has perfect knowledge. Right? We reject that. No, we're individuals. We're right. People. We're fallible people. We're learning as we go, but at any given time, our knowledge is incomplete, and so people are going to regret outcomes, and then they're going to learn, like I said, learn and correct the next time. And so you can't just take a snapshot of it. See, that's what the other side wants to do too. They want to take a snapshot of the market at any given time and say, "Oh, look at the problems," not realizing it's an ongoing, continuous process where people are making adjustments and entrepreneurs are seeing profit opportunities. And so one snapshot can look very different from one you take a day later or however much time. We have to keep reminding that it's a dynamic process. Time is so essential to the analysis, but people don't want to look at that. They look at one day and say, "Look at this problem. Government, come in. Hurry up, government." And so we just have to keep teaching that. I didn't talk much about property rights, or hardly at all in this, but obviously a lot of what's called market failure is a failure to allow property rights and define property rights. Yeah. So if you got a polluted lake, that's an old story. Who owns the lake? And we know about the tragedy of commons, overfishing. We know that that problem is not rooted in the market. It's rooted in the failure to allow property rights to evolve and be defined and enforced. And that's a political failure, not a market failure.
Would you agree? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think one of the problems arises when people seem to assume that every question or problem has a definite answer.
Right.
And that if it's not being solved, either the overfishing problem or something by the market or people actually engage in it, that there must be an answer to be found through government. And maybe there's just no answer. It's something that's got to continue to push and pull and will never truly be solved.
I think that's fair. As Thomas Sowell, I'll invoke Thomas Sowell here. Thomas Sowell says there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. That's a pretty good thing to keep in mind. If you do, you can't just do one thing. The ecologists like to say the first law of ecology is you can't do one thing because anything you do has implications. Well, that's true of economics too.
How would you describe how you've been talking about so-called market failure, also would you call it a, could it be a fallacy of the neglected aspect? Because of like what Augusto Navarro was talking about, if you go further back, you see where a government intervention actually caused it. This also goes into the whole perfect knowledge issue. So it could be described as fallaciousness through the neglected aspect.
That's a good point, and that's what I was thinking of with the medical care case. You know, people think there's a free market in medical care, and we say, no, wait a second, look at how the government is so dominant in this industry. So yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Seems like there could be a nice bullet list of things that are considered market failure that are actually this thing or that thing or that thing or that thing. You could probably come up with a good 7 bullets.
Yeah. Right. But when you come down to it, I still think David Freeman has a point that in almost any realm you can't have this, and there may be a minority of cases. Like his case of the 12th century battle, right? If one person gets away and everybody stays, that person saves himself, and it really doesn't, reduce the effect in stopping the charge. But if everybody thinks that, and everybody runs, of course, the ultimate. Because you could say there's government involved there. Who started the war? Who's fighting the war? Governments.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say. We're talking about two governments going against each other. Where's the market?
That's true. You've pulled back a little bit to look at the larger context, but I was looking at the more particular thing. But that's true. That's true. That's true. What else? Somebody say something.
Yeah, gentlemen, I was going to jump in here before, but I'm glad you mentioned the the market is a dynamic process, and there is no process that's 100% efficient, and so it's a matter of which, one thing, if we wanted to be elitist and look at what's the optimum, if we're going to control, going to overlook society, and the free market is. We all know that, right? It's the most efficient and effective allocator of scarce resources over time and space, and using price as the language of the market. And there are times when things get distorted and messed up, but it is a dynamic process that's self-correcting. Now, in contrast to the political processes that continue down the wrong path.
Right, and there's an interest in going down. There's an interest in going down the wrong path, as I mentioned, because politicians
going on a wrong path.
Because politicians and bureaucrats. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Right. And so, if someone are looking at, and if you look at it just from a standpoint, looking at, beyond the plus or minus 3 sigmas, one isolated instance or a couple of isolated instances and pointing that to market failure. No, it's what happened in all processes. None of them are 100% efficient.
Right. And I don't even like to talk about the market allocating resources. I'm going to do. I don't even like to talk about the market allocating resources. Now I'm getting my own voice back at me. I'll do a webinar in a couple of months. I think maybe the month after next will be October, called "The Market Doesn't Ration." I really hate when people say, and this relates to the medical care. Remember when Obamacare was being debated? People would say, people who don't want a lot of government involved. They may not be for the free market totally, but people that were worried about having more government involvement would say, we're going to end up with rationing. And the other side would say, well, wait a second, the market already rations, but this will be rationing on a fair basis. And so the pro-market people often would say, no, market rationing is actually better. And I, in my small voice, stepped in and said, no, the market doesn't ration at all. Ration, don't forget, has the same root as the word rationality. Ration means somebody is planning something, like ration tickets during World War II, right? You had a bureau that was printing up the tickets and deciding who got how much every month. That's what rationing is. The market doesn't ration, because what's the result of the array of, quote, distribution of goods? It's not even a distribution, right? But let's use it for a second. How does the distribution of goods come about in a marketplace? It comes about through exchange. Individuals exchanging their property. There's no rationing going on. There's not even an allocation going on. So I like to be real careful in that language and not even talk about the market rationing or allocating, because it sounds like there's some intelligence behind it, planning the overall scheme, and that we know that that's not what happens. Right?
They also seem to assume that there's like only so many scalpels, say, to go around, and that they have to allocate these without realizing, well, with the market, with prices, we will create more scalpels because you'll allow the prices to rise and bring in more resources. That's a huge difference that they miss when they drives me nuts when they say that all the time too. Rationing.
Yeah, if I go to the store, and buy a pound of apples, so I give I don't know what it is, $5 for a bag of apples. The apples haven't been allocated or rationed. That's their property, and I took my property, the $5, and we made a swap. I don't know why we would want to call that rationing or allocation. But it's convenience, and if you talk, if you're talking to a group where everybody knows what you mean, like this group, then you can use it perhaps as a shorthand. But I think we really need to be careful and not encourage people out there to think that we believe the market rations or allocates. It's always individuals all the way down. What's that line in? It's turtles all the way down. For us, it's individuals all the way down, making decisions, micro decisions at the margin, all the time, except when we're sleeping.
One small clarification. This is Agustin again.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think it's very, very appropriate at this point of time to clarify that the markets are spontaneous orders, that they do function through processes like competition. But in order to accomplish a successful market operation, competition should be present, and as much as you can, as much competition you can get, it's going to be better in the general perspective. But the most important element is the following, is free access. Free access is the very first step on this process. And the interventions and restrictions normally coming from government are right there in the access. And if you don't have free access, you will never get the beneficial consequence of competition.
I agree totally.
So you can place a cart before the horses.
I agree completely, because what people don't generally understand is what's important to competition is the potential for competition. And that's what you're saying. You need to have no government barriers to entry, licensing, and all that other stuff. I totally agree. Good point.
Right.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Well, we're only about a minute or two before top of the hour here. Let me thank everybody. I appreciate your attention and discussion. That was a good one. I hope you'll come back next month. As I said, it's the 11th, September 11th. And the subject will be the market is a beautiful thing. So maybe some overlap with this, but it'll be a different angle. So I look forward to yeah, well, we'll be doing this every month, so keep an eye out at the FFF site for the announcements. And hope to see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheldon.
Thank you all.
Seeing you.